Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, because our program is in its 26th year, I interview writers about their craft, what they're working on now, what they've accomplished in the past, what they might be planning for the next few years. Sometimes our writers are poets, sometimes they're editor journalists, sometimes they're nonfiction writers, sometimes they're playwrights, all kinds of writers. In fact, we have all kinds of artists on. Besides writers, we have had on occasionally musicians, painters, playwrights, actors. It's a pretty wide net. So if you have an idea for someone who might be a good guest for the Writer's Block, please look for our address at the end of the show. We'd be glad to get your suggestions. I also want to remind you that the Writer's Block and all the other original productions that come out of Cape Ann TV are a product of Access Cable Television, a wonderful community service made possible by cable only. When you see those dish commercials on TV, don't be tempted. You stick with cable and you get all the programming that comes out of Cape Ann originally for and about Cape Anners. Tonight, I'm very happy to say we do have a writer, a very distinguished and prolific writer by the name of Justin Demetri. I am very impressed by his scope, and I want to read you a couple of the titles that have come out of Justin's pen. Peculiar Place Names of Cape Ann, Gloucester Along the Water, Gloucester Fishing Disasters of the 19th Century, and Thoroughbreds Under Sail, Surviving Gloucester Fishing Schooners. Now, he doesn't concentrate only on Gloucester or Cape Ann. One of his books is far afield from those subjects. It's titled Food Lover's Guide to Amsterdam. Justin, welcome to the Writer's Block.
Thanks for having me, John.
I'm really impressed by your scope.
That's kind words, thank you.
I know that you were born in Gloucester.
That's right.
And went to school in Gloucester.
That's right.
So I understand your Gloucester interest. Mm-hmm. Where did Amsterdam come from? Well,
it's a product of my travels. I don't travel as much as I'd like to these days with a 5-year-old at home. But starting in my late teens and into my early 20s, I traveled as much as I could. That included 2 backpacking trips through Western Europe. When I was 19, that was my first experience, backpacked for about 3 months. And then after I graduated college at UMass Boston, myself and what would later become my wife, we did another 3 months traveling through Europe. And it's infectious. You kind of get the travel bug from there. So
I guess you stopped in Amsterdam, huh?
Yes. My connection with Amsterdam started before writing. It was actually connected to my Gloucester connections, really through the influence of Joe Garland, really. I was one of the original members of the Gloucester Adventure, and that's how I met Joe and Helen Garland. And they kind of got me, Joe especially really encouraged me to learn as much as I could about Gloucester history, Cape Ann history in general, especially the fisheries, because I come from a Gloucester fishing family. And in that process, being a curious guy that I am, I was also listening to shortwave radio at the time. And I used to listen to Radio Netherlands, which came pretty clear across the Atlantic.
Really?
Right around 8 o'clock at night, I'd be tuning in. I was 12, 13 years old. And you could write a letter to Radio Netherlands. So
this is in English, they're broadcasting?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's not as common as it used to be, but before the internet, all these large radio stations had English broadcasts at certain times of the night, and many of them still do. So I wrote a letter to Radio Netherlands talking about my town, because that's what they usually did, was a little highlight on some of the readers. So I wrote about Gloucester, and because of really Joe's encouragement of me getting involved in local maritime history, I knew there was a connection historically between our most famous type of vessel, the Gloucester fishing schooner, and the schooner rig, which was originally developed in Holland in about 1650 or so. So I wanted to highlight some of the connections we had with the old world. And I don't really exactly remember what I wrote in that letter, but they must have liked it because I got a call one morning waiting for the school bus, and they interviewed me about Gloucester.
Really?
So that was my first.
Were you late for school that day?
No, they timed it just right.
Oh.
That was just the first phone call. Then
Oh.
they knew what was happening. They knew the time difference. So they interviewed me about Gloucester, and
And how old were you then, Justin?
I think I was either 12 or 13 at the time.
It's a kick.
Yeah, it was fun, hearing they just, like a lot of programs, they'll tape it and then play it later. So I got to
Like
listen
the writer's block.
Exactly, yeah. So I got to listen to it, and that was a lot of fun. And even today, I still listen to shortwave occasionally, although today it's more on the computer. But it kept me connected to the maritime history of the Netherlands in Western Europe. So years and years later, now that I'm involved in the Essex Shipbuilding Museum, it's still connected in that way. So besides my 2 backpacking trips through Europe, where I flew in and out of Amsterdam and spent some time there, a few years back, right before my son was born, my wife and I spent about a week or so over in Holland, and we rented an apartment in Amsterdam.
Oh, so you lived there for a while.
Yeah, just for a week to 10 days, and we've seen some of the outskirts, a lot of the places and things we couldn't do necessarily when we were backpacking. When your life is, on your shoulders and you're eating bread and cheese. This time we got to experience more of, the various restaurants and really kind of just, living not in a hostel, but in an apartment in a residential area, and get that feel
Real
of
life.
It was a lot of fun, yeah.
They do have good bread and cheese in Europe, though.
Oh yeah,
A lot easier to find.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially in Holland, where they take bread and cheese pretty seriously.
Yeah.
So it all kind of a lot of what I write about. It might seem like they're not connected, but it's all snowballed. It's all a product of my experiences.
I was remiss in your introduction. I have written down here, and I forgot to mention, you are the head of tourist operations, is that correct, at Essex Shipbuilding Museum?
Yeah, my title is Visitor Services Director.
Visitor Services Director.
Which essentially I do most of the full tours. I'm usually the face for the the walk-in public for the museum, and on the sidelines I also do what I can as far as inquiries, as historical inquiries from the archive. At this point, I have a pretty deep knowledge of what was constructed in Essex and the fisheries of Gloucester.
And as you mentioned, your connection with the Adventure was made in Essex, and then towed. I think it was towed over here, wasn't it, to be fitted?
Yeah, most of the vessels by that time were being towed over to Gloucester to be fitted out.
Yeah.
Get them out of Essex as soon as possible, get them fishing.
And get them fishing and get more room in Essex for another boat.
Mm-hmm. And like another connection to that actually is the yard that we work in, the A.D. Story Shipyard, which belongs to the Essex Shipbuilding now. That was where my own family's fishing boat, the St. Peter, was launched back in 1927, which, again, even as a young kid, growing up down the fort in a fishing community, by the time I got involved with Adventure, it wasn't lost on me that this was all part of a larger progression in the Gloucester fishing history. So,
St. Peter is still.
They're all gone.
Is St. Peter gone?
Yeah, but she was launched in 1927 for the Favazza family, who are known, outside of our little sphere as the family that brought the statue that we still use at the festival. So there's a connection with the families and also the festival as well.
Am I right saying I remember the St. Peter? Was it around in the 70s and 80s?
Yeah, my grandfather and his best friend Joe Gigaloni owned the boat until 1987.
Okay, yeah, I have seen it down there.
Oh yeah.
Thought
as a kid, I think she was either the oldest or second oldest boat in the fleet.
That's a good history. I want to show some of the books that you've written. I'll come back to Amsterdam.
Sure, yeah.
But here you brought two of the books, Peculiar Place Names of Cape Ann by Justin Demetri, with a beautiful print of a Lane oil. I don't recognize it well enough to remember the title.
I don't remember the title, but it's one that he took from close to where his house was, looking over to the fort.
To be right across the boulevard right now, or he's standing maybe in front of the boulevard?
I imagine he is probably close to the current Coast Guard station.
Could we show that again? Oh, it's from,
And he's looking towards the fort. That rocky outcropping is roughly where Cape Pond Ice is now.
okay. I'm over at the other side of the Cut Bridge. I was thinking that was Stage Fort Park there. This is available in print, clearly. Is this on a Kindle as well?
Yeah, most of what I've written as far as these small books are started off as Kindle, and they were really a trial run, honestly, to get into the self-publishing world. Kindle made it really, really easy just to try your hand at it. So these are my first attempts. Since then, I've also put them into print with CreateSpace.
I wonder if you could take one or two of the peculiar place names and read us a description of one or two of those.
Sure. I'll try to pick a short one. Okay, well, since the fort is on the cover,
Okay.
I just happened to turn to the fort. The fort, as we call it, is named for the successive watchtowers and fortifications built, possibly starting as early as 1705, to protect the growing settlement in the inner harbor. The original name was Watch House Point, or Watch House Neck. By the War of 1812, it was known as Fort Defiance. Nothing remains of the fort except some parts of the embankment. Also, the line of houses around Fort Square were built along the wall of the old fort, using the bricks and stone for the foundations.
So the bricks are still there, rearranged.
More or less,
Some of
yeah.
them.
Yeah, basically, if you live on Fort Square, your basement and the granite and brick foundations are all probably taken from the last remnants of the fort.
What was your address as a young boy growing up?
My parents still live on Beach Court. I grew up on one Beach Court, and these days my parents live down there. My mom's parents live in the same house with them, two family, and just a couple doors down, my Demetri relatives are also on Commercial Street.
Got a pretty healthy family.
Yeah, they're all centrally located.
Grandparents?
Makes for a fun fiesta.
Still going strong? Good. I bet. Could you pick out another strange, or not strange, but interesting place name?
Okay. We'll pick an Essex one this time.
So this is Cape Ann.
Yeah, I try to, once again, I try to make these not only just as a way to get into self-publishing, but also as just quick readable blurbs for visitors, so they have something to go by when they're traveling around. A lot of this based on feedback that I've gotten from visitors.
Well, that's good, because we're broadcast all the way out to Essex.
All the way to Essex, okay.
Rockport, Manchester.
Okay, well, as far as the clams in Essex, the famous Essex clams, the flats in Essex, a lot of them have names, some of them going pretty far back. But one of the most interesting ones is a bank called America's Bank. Let me start here. Many of the clam flats on the Essex River have unique names, but America's was named in honor of one of the most unique characters Essex ever produced, America Burnham. Very talented, very devout, and very eccentric. He was a deeply religious person and also an expert shipwright. When he built his own schooner, the Angel Gabriel, he registered it to the Kingdom of Heaven. America, or Merricky as he was called, never owned a clamming license, since he insisted they were God's clams and could be dug by everyone. The clams he dug he sold door to door, but most often refused payment. That's just a taste of the larger story of America Burnham. He's a real legend in Essex. But as you can see, they're just to kind of whet the appetite. I want visitors to get a little taste and then to explore on their own.
Do these sell well?
Considering I do little to no marketing, I really can't complain how they sell. They do modestly.
I want to hold this up again. I want to make sure that our viewers have this locked in their visual memories. Can we show that? Yeah, there it is. Peculiar place names of Cape Ann. So it's not just Gloucester, it's the entire Cape. Justin Demetri, and this is available in town, and I assume in Rockport.
As of right now, I just have it online on Amazon, either through print or on Kindle. Going into next season, I may have some of these in stock at the Essex Shipbuilding gift shop.
We'll get people to clamor for these
Oh, all right, yeah.
at the museum. You brought another book, more specifically, it's about Gloucester. Gloucester along the water, coastal sites along America's oldest seaport. I want to hold that up as well. And this is available on Amazon. And
Yep, the same as my others, yep.
yes, Gloucester along the water. Justin Demetri, tell us about this book, Justin.
Well, this book arose from, once again, feedback from visitors. Once a month during the summer, I go aboard Harold Burnham's schooner Ardell. It's something we've kind of talked about since the boat was being built, was that I could do narrated harbor tours. People love sailing in Gloucester Harbor, but on previous sails, what I've heard is, this is beautiful, but we don't really know what we're looking at. So that's why I asked Harold if I could do these tours once a month. And from the tours and what I say on the tours, I've kind of compiled some of the spots people ask about as you sail around the harbor.
So you can explain the fort, 10 Pound Island, Stage Fort Park.
Exactly, yeah.
And I'll bet the tourists are interested in that, because if they've come from foreign climes, they're completely unfamiliar with everything that we take for granted.
And there's so much around. Yeah, I mean, things that we've seen, going back and forth, and like you said, we take for granted. But they want to know what that house is, or even today, even residents in town, when we're on the boulevard and we see the turret that's on Cardinal Cushing's villa, a lot of people mistake that for Hammond's Castle, and it's just perspective. It's just, we just take it for granted. Oh yeah, that must be Hammond's Castle. I see it in the distance, but it really isn't. It's
down the coast a little bit.
Exactly.
Magnolia.
Yeah. So I thought it'd be fun just to, visualize, going around the harbor and pointing out these highlights, and even more so if you're on a sail, whether it's on the Lannon or the Ardell, or if you're sailing or on a powerboat with a friend. At least you have something to flip through as you're traveling around the harbor.
Is this going to be available as a sound tape or podcast?
Haven't thought of it yet, but that's a good idea.
It'd be nice to have that stuck in a bud in your ear as you're kind of wandering around.
You got me thinking.
I want to ask you something about the technical aspects, because I think our viewers are always interested in someone. You've got an interest, and you want to publish the book, and you've done an excellent job. These are both very presentable, nice-looking books, and they're also small enough to fit in a back pocket. Tourists would want to have it for that kind of convenience. And what's the process once you get an idea of putting it in print and getting it in print and getting permissions for photographs and that kind of thing?
I kind of jumped into it not knowing a lot about it. In hindsight, I've realized there's a lot of help online, either on web pages from people that have already done this. There's thousands of YouTube videos that can give you pointers. And there's also a lot of help within the system itself, whether it's through the Kindle website and their community forum, or if you do it the other way and go print first. There's also a similar pieces of guidance.
So excuse me, you graduated from UMass with a degree in anthropology, cultural anthropology.
That's right. Yep.
So your background is not IT or coding, anything technical like that?
No, I mean, I'm computer savvy enough to get through this, but this was not really all that sophisticated. They do a lot of the heavy lifting for you.
So this is doable if someone doesn't have a strong computer background.
Yes, that you can, and if you're not comfortable creating your own cover with the templates they offer, there are resources online. There are whole businesses set up to edit, format your Kindle or self-published book. However, I kind of want to do it myself, especially because they were small books. I really wanted just to get them out there. And I always figured I can revise them and update them in the future. So
And these are about 60, 70 pages.
yeah. What I should have done, in hindsight, was start with the print version first, because now that I know a little bit more of how they're formatted, going the print route first and then converting it to Kindle makes for an easier formatting experience. The writing didn't take me long at all. The formatting took probably twice as long. Just trial and error.
So it's kind of difficult to go backwards, give it an electronic product and files, and jam it into a physical book is tougher than
Absolutely.
dumping it the other way.
Yeah, font sizes, page sizes,
Yeah.
the DPI for your images. It's something I had to live and learn, I guess. As far as the images themselves, if I didn't take the image myself, I also used friends' images and also use of Creative Commons images that you can find online, as long as they're royalty free and their permissions allow them to be redistributed.
Was the Lane portrait free to use?
It was. It's in the
public domain.
It's in the public domain. It's actually a Lane painting that is not in the collection at the Cape Ann Historical.
Oh, it's not?
It's actually in Spain. It's in a museum in Madrid.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you have to write to them to
You know
clear
what?
it?
I was going to, but when I found the image through a Creative Commons site, it said that it's free to use for commercial use as long as you attribute it to the museum itself.
Wow,
So
museum in Madrid.
Yeah.
Wow. Did you notice that when you were on tour with your wife and backpacking?
I don't recall going to that particular museum in Madrid. And of course, I've been to the Prado and some of the others, but when I saw the painting, the museum didn't ring a bell.
That's fun. It's nice.
Yeah.
Gloucester's Reach is
Sure,
is
yeah.
pretty broad.
Well, that's another thing you realize too when you're traveling is, almost everywhere, whether it's Europe or the West Coast or down in the Tidewater area of Virginia, like the historic Triangle, people tend to know that where we come from is a special place. You're reminded of that on a regular basis.
It's good. We are from a special place.
I agree.
Even if we weren't born here, some of us. We have some pictures I want to make sure we go to before the end of the program that you bought. And I want to ask our director, Becky Tover, if she can begin to show those pictures. I think we have 7. And if you could describe what we're looking at, Dustin, we have just about 5 minutes left. So
Okay.
go ahead.
What we have here, this is an image from our wine tasting and art auction at the museum, which we just held last Friday. Very successful.
So in the fall of 15.
That's right. Yeah, we do this every year in October. It's our biggest fundraiser of the year. It's a lot of fun. Chabaco Market provides the wine. We had, I believe it was Tim Hopkins that did the catering this year. We have all sorts of gifts and art items that are donated, and we auction them off. And this year was a very successful event.
Good. If we go to the next one, it looks like the same event, is that?
This is, same event. This is from looking down. We have our event at the Waterline Center, which is, I like to call the living heart of the museum. It's actually originally a boat building shed, and half of it still is a boat building shed. This side we use for all different functions. We do our history lectures in here. Of course, we do our fundraisers. You can rent it out for parties. And when we do have classes, it also reverts back to being a boat building shed.
Good.
Just one more picture of the event, showing some of the food being handed out. We had I've been told, I wasn't at this event this year, but I was told that besides a lot of our members, long-standing members, we had a lot of new people coming in as well, which that's really exciting for us. Here's that same space back in 2014. This was a small boat building class done during spring break of 2014. And Jeff Lane, the man with the cap on, he's a local Essex guy, volunteered at the museum as a kid, and now he's a boat builder in his own right, both at our museum and up at Lowell's Boat Shop up in Amesbury. So this is a class he facilitated for 4 high school kids. And in 4 days, they made a 15-foot rowing skiff called the Sharpstown Barge.
How many days?
4 days.
4.
And we have this boat on our property, and we're going to be using it in the near future to row in the river. Here is our museum flagship, the Louis H. Story, which was built by Harold Burnham and a lot of our volunteers back in 1998. She's a replica of something that is called a Chabaco boat. Also, another term we call it is a colonial pickup truck. It's one of the early designs on this side of the Atlantic. I like to tell the visitors this is basically an old world concept in boat design modified for a new world environment. So what better design to have for the Essex Shipbuilding Museum?
Very nice lines.
Very distinctive, yeah. And here is Fritz Fuller, one of our master volunteers. He is teaching a school group here about steam bending. These kids just finished steaming that 15-foot plank that you see clamped onto that mock frame. And this is one of the highlights of the school kids. And also group tours as well. They can participate in this.
They steam it and then bend it.
Exactly. Just like how, when Harold, our neighbor, is building one of the new Essex schooners, he uses this same practice. It's been like this since wooden boats, as far as I know. And earlier this year, because the Louis Story is undergoing a restoration, we had one of the museum friends brought down a portable sawmill, and over the course of a day, the guys in the yard cut up, I think, 7 white oak tree trunks into 2-inch planking, and much of that is going to be used for the new planking on our flagship.
Is there one more, or is that it? That's all the pictures? Okay. Thank you very much for that. I wanted very much to get back to Amsterdam, but we only have one minute left, and I'm going to have to make you promise to come back and talk about food in Amsterdam.
Sure. I could also talk about the work I've done on another website called lifeinitaly.com. For 5 years, I was a writer on Italian food and travel and culture.
I went to school in Rome. I'd like to hear about that.
Oh, I'd like to hear your stories.
I want to thank Justin Demetri very much for being with us this evening. I've learned a lot about Gloucester's names. I've learned a lot about shipbuilding, about his career in shipbuilding, and even something, a little smattering or a beginning of something about food in Amsterdam. So it's been a great learning experience for me. If you've learned something about Gloucester and Amsterdam and shipbuilding, then we're both in the same boat. Good to have you with us, and I hope to see you again next week on the Writer's Block. Good night.